The Y Curve with Phil Dobby and Roger Hearing.
Do not march on Moscow.
That's what Montgomery said was rule 1 on page 1 of the Book of War.
And Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner mercenaries, didn't get more than halfway when he tried it.
Napoleon and Hitler could have told him.
But what was that extraordinary episode all about? What does it tell us about the Putin regime? Is Russia's president now fatally weakened?
And what are Russians being told about it?
And most importantly, could it now bring the end of the Ukraine war a bit closer?
That's this week on The Y Curve, brought to you by Wigmore Associates.
The Y Curve.
So, look, Roger, you are obviously the scholar here amongst us. I mean, that is obvious to anyone who's a regular listener to this podcast. So tell me about the history of Ukraine. Obviously, it came about through the dissolution of the Soviet Union, but who determined?
Well, kind of. I mean, historically there was a kind of Ukrainian proto-state even before Russia existed. If you want to go back a very long way.
Well, in the Russian Civil War, they were fighting for independence of Ukraine. In the early part of the 19th century, weren't they?
Again, mixed up a bit. I mean, the early part of the 20th century, you had the Russian Civil War, and then you had effectively when the Russian Empire broke up to some extent, you had areas like Ukraine that were temporarily independent, but they were overwhelmed by the Bolsheviks pretty quickly. And that, I mean, without going back into the far reaches of history, I think that's where we have to look at it. But the point is really that we are now in a situation where Russia invaded Ukraine, as we all know.
But Putin's point is that parts of it, obviously, he believes crime. I mean, he wants all of it. Obviously, he wants everything to go back to the whole Soviet era. But if he wasn't to get that, I guess he'd say, well, Crimea is definitely ours, and the Donbass region. So, I mean, why is he determining those regions in particular as being areas? How were the borders determined when we saw that dissolution of the Soviet Union?
Well, they were based on the old republics. The Soviet Union, as it was a group of Soviet socialist republics, hence the USSR name. And it was the republics, as the lines drawn up, that was the basis of the areas that went independent, of course, in the early 1990s, Belarus being, of course, another one, on that basis. And they decided they wanted to walk away. Now, what Putin is doing, I mean, it may reach a lot further back than the Soviet Union. Many people think he actually sees himself as a sort of descendant of Peter the Great and trying to carry on that, which is effectively restoring the Russian Empire. But we can't really peer inside his mind, I think, and get the ideas that are going there, except in as much as to say that he is determined to win this war. But at the moment, it's looking very much as if he isn't. Don't forget, it's more than a year now that this has been going on, and the quick war did not finish the way he intended it. And we are now in 2023 at a point where, well, maybe an inflection point, because things are clearly under great pressure back at home. And that, of course, brings us to what happened with the Wagner group. I mean, a really very extraordinary moment.
Yeah, and yet we've not seen too much in the way of consequence beyond that, have we? And whenever I read comments from people within Russia, there seems to be almost sort of like an antipathy towards it all, as though, I mean, either people are scared to speak out so they just get on with their lives, or they're older and they believe that perhaps Putin is doing the right thing. You begin to wonder, like in the West, we think, there must be supporters within Russia. And maybe there are, but then I wonder how many ardent supporters there are. And there's others who say, this is politics, best avoided, let's just get on with our life.
Well, hopefully we'll get a sense of that when we speak to our guests in just a moment. But I think the real problem is that, don't forget, many of these people have grown up in the Soviet Union. And the idea that you don't, whatever you say nothing was a general principle. It was a good way of avoiding being, back in Stalin's era, of course, getting a bullet in the back of the head, but later on getting detained or imprisoned or put in a psychiatric hospital. All kinds of things like that went on to suppress dissent. So most people, I think, there still have a kind of feeling that actually the best thing is not to get involved. So the truth is, I don't think we know what people think.
Yeah, and understandable that Ukraine, who's obviously away from that control, are far more nationalistic. And of course, during the Stalin era, a lot of them died because it was
the horrendous famine. There was an engineered famine in the 1930s, the Holodomor, which still rankles a lot with a lot of Ukrainians, of course, and is in part maybe what informs their desire very much to stay away from Russian control. But this is a huge area, huge sort of thing to look at. And I think what we want to try and look at today is what is the effect of what's happened in terms of the Wagner uprising, if that's what it was, mutiny, putsch, whatever you want to call it, didn't get anywhere. But what does it tell us about what's going on in Russia? Because the thing at the moment is you've got a kind of stalemate, perhaps the Ukrainian forces edging forward slightly on various fronts in the war itself. How long can either side sustain that? And now people are thinking, well, perhaps the Russians may be the weak party in this if they can't even keep their own military bodies under control.
Right, we'll look at all of that this week. Now, look, how are you managing your money? Not just your money, of course, all your assets, your home, your investment portfolio, your pension. Are you getting the best return? Are you optimizing your arrangements regarding tax, for example, for right now, but also what happens to your estate when you've gone? Are you sure you have it all planned out correctly, or does it all need a good looking at from someone who knows what they're doing? Well, if so, then talk to the folks at Wigmore Associates, because they can help with all of that. They are a boutique wealth management firm. They've been helping people out for decades. They can help you too if you give them a call on 0207 224 3400. That's 0207 224 3400, or visit wigmore-associates.co.uk. They are proud supporters of the YCAV. That's why we're here week after week.
They keep us going. They're what put us on air, which we're very grateful for. But let's bring in someone now to talk then about really what is going on inside Russia, the wilderness of mirrors, as it has been called in the past, to find out what people are really thinking, if indeed one can peer that far in. Vera Tolz-Zilintekevic is a professor of Russian studies at Manchester University and joins us now.
So, Vera, what do you think happened with the Wagner mutiny, if it was a mutiny? What was, and if not, what was it really? Because it seems a mystery, doesn't it? I mean, what brought it about in the first place, and why did it end so quickly? There's so many unanswered questions around this.
That is, of course, the issue. It's an important question, but I'm not basically very qualified to answer the question, and I don't think that very many academics actually have sufficient information to answer the question. I don't even know to what extent intelligence services in the United States or United Kingdom are privy to ins and outs of what's going on inside the Kremlin and the kind of wider Russian elite.
Yeah, and Vera, I mean, obviously we're not clear on, as you say, it's all very, very murky. But in a way, is it possible to understand how something like this could have happened? Because it seems very strange. One can't imagine it really in any other country, I think. Certainly not an advanced country.
No, the thing is that it's obviously indicative of the type of political system which Russia has developed under Vladimir Putin. So how I kind of imagine the system is that Putin is a kind of chief arbiter between different groups, between different clans, and you can say it's kind of semi-mafia clans, whose leaders, Prigozhin was one, have their own interests. They kind of fight with each other, and Putin used to be able quite skillfully to arbitrate between them. Particularly under Putin, but even in the 1990s already, Russia, in a way, failed to develop proper political institutions, governmental institutional, state institutional, party networks, which even existed in the Soviet period. So it's a really very personalized kind of arrangement of running the country. And to be honest, I was not entirely surprised that in the context of the war, which put enormous strain on this system, because the war is not going according to plan. Clearly, the Russian political and military leadership did not plan for a long-term war. They thought that Kiev will be taken within weeks, if not days. And so that within this system, and in the context of war, the tensions between different political players and kind of groups around specific political players tensions mounted, and that Putin is less and less able to control.
That's the really interesting point, isn't it? I mean, how much is he in control, and is it less than it was before this?
I believe that it is the exposure of Putin's weakness, and the control will further deteriorate as a result of this mutiny. Actually, most commentators, journalists, analysts, and also from intelligence services. We had various interventions from UK and US intelligence services on the matter. They tend to think that it's kind of further undermines Putin's authority. I read only one interesting article and analysis by Anatol Levin, a leading British journalist, who thought that no, the whole affair actually demonstrated Putin's strength. And that's not how I see the situation, because it seems to me that in the system as it exists in Russia, which I kind of tried to describe to you before, the leader can stay in power by projecting a certain type of authority. And in this kind of this projection should include such features as if this leader, in this case Putin, publicly makes a threat to punish an individual, this dictator has to follow on this threat quickly to sustain his legitimacy. On the morning of the 24th of June, in his address to the nation in the context of the mutiny, Putin said that the leaders of the Wagner group, basically he didn't mention Prigozhin by name, but to an extent it was clear he meant Prigozhin, became traitors. And they will be punished with the full force of law. By the end of the same day, it was announced that criminal procedures against criminal case against Prigozhin was dropped. So it was a complete turnaround, which is not, it seems to me, it's not good for Putin's legitimacy.
So why? So I mean, they were mates, weren't they? Basically.
Yeah.
So is that it? Is he looking after an old friend? Is that what's happened here?
No, I doubt that that's just a matter of personal, simple personal relationship. Clearly, I think to me it's an indication that Putin, for some reason, needs Prigozhin. There have been a lot of reports, of course, that Prigozhin looks after Putin's wealth, which is kind of kept somewhere outside Russia, including in Africa, where, of course, Prigozhin managed to build his kind of military forces, as well as his media empire, and he has a lot of business interest on that continent.
So you talked about sort of like, he was trying to corral all these various components of government and quasi-government, all these different clans, I think was the expression you used, and trying to hold them all together. I mean, and that takes strong personality to be able to do that. So do you think the war could actually have been part and parcel of this as well? That, if you've got a lot of various components that aren't seeing eye to eye, there's nothing like the distraction of a war to create a unifying force. Could that be what created the invasion in the first place?
What created, I think, the invasion in the first place is, obviously, to me, ultimately, the main reason for the war is that particularly Putin himself, but also members of his immediate entourage, thought that the war, which they expected to be quick, will be yet another means of indefinitely staying in power. But they obviously hugely miscalculated.
Because it's a show of strength.
Yeah, it's clearly become a show of weakness in a way. And I suppose that's the point there. We've got weakness in that he didn't win the war as quickly as he thought he would, but also that now perhaps Ukrainian forces are making advances. And in his own backyard, it seems, well, at the very least, there's indiscipline. How does that play out for him? Does he then make other moves? Does he try and do something radical or perhaps vicious to try and establish himself as the man in power, still Stalin-like, or does he crumble?
On the one hand, what I presume Putin will try to do is to use the situation to kind of tell to the leaders of these different clans that, look, without me, Prigozhin would have taken Moscow, yeah? So without me, you will start basically killing each other, and there will be a full-fledged civil war in Russia. So basically, you need me. I presume that would be his kind of narrative to the sort of top elites. At the same time, I think with him or without him, I think the chances that Russia will sink into a kind of chaos or a civil war is very, very likely. And I think, to me, it's only a matter of time before that happens. And I expect that there will be sort of another kind of some type of a mutiny. From politicians or the security services, or even, within the military kind of generals and other command. They don't like Shoigu, the defense minister. They think he's a fool, rightly. He's totally incompetent. He's not actually one of them.
So Vera, just to interrupt you at that point, so what you're saying is really very interesting. You think that the path towards a kind of disintegration or civil war is coming. Is it possible to get a sense of how long it will take? Because
it's very difficult. But what I think that obviously this Prigozhin's mutiny, it was kind of put down very quickly. But I think something, again, another mutiny, another disturbance will start. In due course. It's very difficult to predict how quickly. I was at a conference, at a seminar on Wednesday, the 21st of June, and one of the speakers, who is a very kind of eminent specialist on Russia, was saying, no, the system is completely stable. There won't be any disturbances. And then on Saturday, we had Prigozhin's mutiny. So it's difficult to say when, but I think, again, don't hold me to it, but I think within the coming year, there will be something else. And at some point, this will trigger the breakdown, and then it will be very, very quick. So the whole thing will unravel because there are no political institutions to hold the place together.
So it would become a military government that which would take the place. It would be some sort of military overthrow.
It could be military. It could be from security services. It's not going to be kind of a liberal democratic government, because there is none in waiting. All the kind of more liberal or
Will we ever see that in our lifetime? I mean, is there what are Russian people thinking about all this? Because I have to say, whenever I glimpse anything at all from people being interviewed, and obviously it's pretty difficult in these times to see that happen, but there's almost an antipathy I'm seeing from Russian people, as though, well, it's going on. They're not going to say whether they support it or not. Some are obviously quite nationalistic and see it as a battle against the West. But a lot of people are just wanting to get on with their life and call it politics. And, I don't get involved in politics. Is that quite a common attitude, do you think?
Because, Vera, you've done quite a lot of research into the way that the media presents this to Russians and what Russian people think. So just give us a sense of what you think is going through Russian people's minds right now.
Yeah, no, again, that's not easy to say, because in the condition of war, it's difficult to, in any country, let alone a dictatorship like Russia, to get reliable opinion polls. And even if you get reliable opinion polls, you don't know how long, let's say, after the war, the same attitudes will play out. But roughly, what I gather from those people who try to do opinion surveys in Russia at the moment, the number of people who kind of actively support the war is decreasing, but you still have close to half of the population who are either supporting, or at least they're kind of trying not to think. They're trying kind of to distance themselves from it. But the increasing number of people, and probably around half, are either very critical. I come myself from Russia. My circles are completely unrepresentative. I would say it's kind of very liberally Western-oriented academics, and they are all against the war from the very beginning. And against the Putin regime, but I very much appreciate that this is kind of a bubble of kind of very specific circle.
Well, I mean, obviously, that attitude is being driven by what people are watching on TV, and the fact that is all controlled by the state or controlled by Putin.
Yes, the state media. You can't obviously immediately conclude from the output, from the content of the media. You can't conclude about what people think, but it's little doubt that state-controlled media and television have been very much influencing attitude of those people who consume it on a regular basis. And moreover, interestingly, that even before the war, whereas the majority of people, so like 67%, were saying that they watched television at least every week, if not more often. Only 49% said that they trusted television.
Interesting.
And yet, what again scholars demonstrate, that even if people who say they didn't trust television, still some of the propaganda sunk in and influenced their views.
Which is why I wanted to ask you, Vera, what have the media, what have the state media been saying then about the Wagner mutiny? How can they present this? Yeah. What's the official line?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it's obviously evolved from the 23rd of June, when it all started, to 25th of June, by which it finished, and beyond. And in order to kind of make sense of the coverage, we should take into account the fact that whereas clearly state media, particularly television, are controlled by the presidential administration, by the Kremlin, it's a different type of relationship, a different type of censorship than in the Soviet period, because in the Soviet period, the Soviet media system existed and functioned kind of in isolation from the global media sphere. Now, and even though this isolation, of course, wasn't total, but now, basically every Russian citizen who wants to has access to alternative media, despite all the bans. For instance, Telegram channel has multiple oppositional Telegram platform, social media platform, has multiple channels, including oppositional channels and including channels run by Prigozhin. And it is on those channels that Prigozhin put out on the 23rd of June a range of videos with a very strong condemnation of the war and the reasons for the war, and saying that the reasons given to Russian citizens by the leadership, he all blamed it on Shoigu, the defense minister, not on Putin, but that he wasn't truthful. But on the whole, there was actually quite truthful presentation of how and why the government, Russian government, began this war, how there was absolutely no threat of Ukraine attacking Russia as claimed by the Kremlin, and also how disastrously the war is going, partly because of the huge corruption.
So how far would this actually have gone? It's on Telegram channels. Are you saying that actually quite a lot of Russians would have seen this and perhaps believe it?
Yes, quite a lot of Russians would have seen it, and certainly enough for the state media to have to cover the rebellion. Because in the Soviet period, something like that, particularly wrapped up within a day, it wouldn't have been covered. It wouldn't have been such a rebellion, but there were disturbances in the Soviet period. They simply were not covered. Now they have to cover, and that presents a problem for state media. And also, of course, another problem is that Wagner fighters have been, until the 23rd of June, presented as heroes. Yeah, so you have to kind of deal with that issue. And what we see from the coverage is, of course, again, state control. And until the Kremlin gave a kind of green light to report certain things, the state media wouldn't say a word. It's in particular the state television. The main channel, Первый канал, it's called the first channel, put out the first report on the mutiny around 2 a.m. On Saturday, the 24th. So there was virtually no coverage on the 23rd.
This was a few hours, just to give people context. This is a few hours, really, in about 12 or perhaps 24 hours since the whole thing began.
And it was a very short report. There was no context given. And it kind of 3 points were made that the claims made clearly in Prigozhin's video about the Wagner troops being bombed by the Russian army was not true, that Wagner fighters should not obey treacherous demands of their leaders, and that the measures to detain Prigozhin are being taken.
So how important is public opinion in all of this? Because if you had, I think you said, maybe it was as much as half and half between the people who are supporting the war and those who are against it. In the West, obviously, we're in that situation. There would be demonstrations in the streets. I mean, Britain was pulled apart on Brexit. Insignificant compared to what we're talking about here. But, I mean, we're not hearing anything about public protests because we'd expect the regime would be overtaken by the response from the public. But it seems like people are keeping themselves to themselves on this. If you are in opposition to it, you're quietly in opposition.
No, that's actually not not how exactly I would have presented it. No. First, of course, then the coverage and the situation changed on the 24th. And, of course, the subsequent line of the Kremlin was, and the state media, was that the whole society, all the people supported Putin. This is, of course, was not the case because, again, on Telegram channels, you could see that there was a lot of warm welcome for Wagner fighters in Rostov, which basically the city they took over. And that's a city, it's a large city, it's over 1 million people. And you had this warm welcome of Wagner troops in the streets. Again, Wagner and Prigozhin is an appalling force. Yes, it's not that these are some kind of great liberals who are coming to free Russia from Putin. I know Prigozhin is
just
very destructive, appalling leader. But clearly, not the whole society was behind Putin on the 24th of June. And there's an interesting was an interesting article in a oppositional newspaper, Medusa, which is it's an opposition outlet, not just newspaper, based in Riga, a Russophone outlet, and they had kind of reactions, including on social media channel, of the Russians in Rostov, and some of them were saying that we were happy that at least something is happening. Yeah. Now, at the beginning of the war, what I think should be stressed, at the beginning of the war, there were demonstrations in the big cities. But not only these demonstrations were dispersed by very, very brutal force of the police, but people were threatened. A new legislation was introduced under which you could get 15 years in prison.
They were very brutally put down. I think we remember the pictures that were very strong. But Vera, what would there are people who are against it, or the people for it, but the average Joe, let's call him Ivan, in Moscow somewhere, or perhaps out in the country in Voronezh or anywhere, what would they actually now think? If you asked them and they sat down, what would they actually think is happening? Do they think this was just a small disturbance that was got rid of? Do they think that Putin is perhaps weakened? Are they losing faith? What sense do you got of what they actually feel now?
I think that obviously there will be a variety of views, but certainly in big cities, the people who kind of follow the situation, who are really giving some thought and have been giving some thought to what's going on over the past year, will see that and will feel that this is a sign of the first sign of the whole basically state unraveling.
What do they do about that in a situation where there's clearly fear and people in opposition tend to have a predisposition for food poisoning or falling out of windows? I mean, how do you stand up against Putin, I guess, unless you are another barbaric character who wants to create the same sort of regime?
I think that, again, probably if we'll see kind of Putin falling and the current network of this political military leadership unraveling, it won't necessarily be replaced by a much better regime. Maybe will be replaced by a kind of similar authoritarian regime, which, however, might want to, for its own ends, stop the war.
You don't see Navalny emerging from prison like a latter-day Mandela, then?
I don't think so. No, not in the no. Because he doesn't really have a kind of sufficient sort of backing across society. But if Putin's weakness and the weakness of his entourage is exposed for a longer period of time than we saw during the mutiny, there will be, I think, public kind of protest.
Well, if you go through a process where it's revealed that you sold a lie as far as the war's concerned, Putin disappears, you get another despot who's in charge, and people recognise that the same thing's happening again. Even if the war finishes in the process, you still have another authoritarian regime. People are taking a lot in at that stage, aren't they? We've been lied to. We are living under a dictatorship and we don't have real government. How long will people put up with that for, I wonder?
Yeah, again, it's also a lot depends on the kind of economic prosperity and stability in big cities, because change of regimes don't happen in the countryside or small towns. They happen in big cities. And I know that on a lot of oppositional channels on Telegram, which I look at, and there are all these photographs of how desperate various villages and small provincial cities across Russia look. But in big cities from St. Petersburg and Moscow to Rostov, sort of over 1 million cities, the kind of middle classes live still, even in the context of war, surprisingly, quite well. They have quite a lot to lose. And that's how, obviously, one of the ways in which Putin's regime has maintained its legitimacy and its power, that it managed because of sort of Russia's sort of wealth in terms of natural resources, buy off quite significant groups of people, particularly these middle classes in big cities, who really were in desperate situation in the 1990s. But then the regime kind of shared some of its spoils in terms of accumulating wealth in the 2000s. But if the war destroys that economic prosperity, but let alone if there are indeed like Ukrainian drones, I don't know whether it's true or not, that the drones were kind of affecting flights from one of the main airports in Moscow. So if the war actually begins to very directly impact on the well-being of the majority of the population in big cities, that could also lead to great instability.
Vera, I know, I mean, historians hate parallels, I know, but I mean, when I'm listening to you, I'm talking about, well, a war that's not going very well, chaos at home, the working classes perhaps finding that they are getting poorer, not doing well, while perhaps seeing that the richer people are doing okay. It all sounds a bit 1916 to me. Is that a ridiculous parallel to draw?
No, 1916, 17. And now that was the context of the World War, where it was the first historically total war, meaning that the whole kind of society was directly involved in the war. This is now not a total war. Yeah. So the situation in that sense is somewhat different, but there are parallels. It's a war which is not going. It's not going well. As long as it's going on, there is a chance that it will have an increasing impact on kind of the life of average people in big cities in Russia. And you have a highly unstable elite, which is a network of personalized kind of relationship between kind of leaders of mafiosi clans and no political institution. So there could be an unraveling of the whole state structure, I think. And in that sense, there would be a parallel to 1917 when the whole state structure collapsed.
Right. But it seems to be that you're saying that if so long as people in the big cities are feeling to have a decent standard of living, not too much is going to change.
Yes. That I think is the case.
So one final question before we go, because we do have to go now. Unfortunately, I feel like we could talk to you all day because you provided so many useful insights, Vera. But I mean, you've been quite candid. I mean, do you get worried about talking out against the Russian? I mean, even though you're at Manchester University, do you get worried about talking out against the Russian regime?
No, I'm not kind of significant enough. Person. I don't have Russian citizenship. No, I'm not worried. But what I want to say that I do have friends in Russia who are extremely candid. and who put things on social media, which are very open, are involved in some other activities on individual basis, kind of protesting against what's going on. And
do you worry for those friends who are doing that?
I'm worried for them.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how I'm reluctant to raise issues when talking to them, but they themselves volunteer the kind of information. And again, volunteer to articulate their positions. And that, again, is quite different from the Soviet times, because, as I said, I left in 1982. So I remember telephone conversations before Gorbachev came to power with my friends back in Russia, and they were very, very kind of careful as to what they said or didn't say.
Well, you'll be pleased to know, Vera, the YKEV audience isn't big enough to raise your profile to a point where it becomes dangerous. But,
no, it's getting there.
It's been great to talk to you.
Vera, thank you so much for doing that. Really interesting insights into, what could happen, as you say, maybe within the next year in Russia. We will see, and no doubt we'll come back to talk to you if we get an insight on whether it is indeed 1916. But I take on board some parallels don't work. But it was great to talk to you.
Thanks for your time, Vera.
Thank you. I hope it was okay.
More than okay. Thanks very much, Vera. So that was very interesting, wasn't it? And it could all be kicking off over the next year. Look, you do wonder. You think either the last place in the world you'd want to live. Well, obviously Ukraine's not a great place right now, but living in Russia, living under this regime.
Well, yes, indeed. But I suppose you could also...
It's even worse than living in England. Do you know?
Well, there we are, yes. Another Ukraine, but UK is perhaps, obviously in a much, much better position than Ukraine. But the fact is that our economy, and people seem to think this right across the whole political spectrum at the moment, is not where it should be, and is so much worse than the rest of our partners in the G7.
Well, our inflation, in many other parts of the world, they're seeing inflation now has peaked and is coming down. Our core inflation is still going up. It's likely that the OECD is going to revise their forecasts, and we're going to see a negative growth figure. In other words, a recession for the UK, whereas most other parts of the world, perhaps Europe won't get away without it.
Germany's already got one, but it's something that's saying you need a recession just to bring down inflation. What does that say about how the economy is being managed?
Yeah, well, it says a lot, doesn't it, really? To actually say to people, yes, you've got to be worse off. And then, of course, with that comes the whole rich-poor gap, because obviously the poor are feeling this more than the top end of society. So, and that
the banks are doing rather well at the moment.
The banks are doing incredibly well, making big profits, because it's all upside for them. They higher interest rates, the cost of lending out money, which they create.
Why has it happened? That's the question, because we all came out of the COVID pandemic roughly the same time.
Yeah.
Why is Britain doing so badly?
Well,
that's really the next question we want to ask.
Do you want to answer now, or should we save it till next week?
Let's save it till next week.
Okay.
Let's find some people who know what they're talking about to talk about it too.
You don't want me to offer my opinion ahead of time. All right, no, we'll leave it.
We will hear it in due course.
Hear it next week. That's next week on the YKEV. Why is Britain the basket case it is compared to the rest of the world? We are doing much worse than just about everywhere else. That's next week on the YKEV, brought to you by Wigmore Associates. Thanks for listening this week. See you next week.
The Why Curve.